The smoke was coming out of the second-floor windows of the duplex on Brooker Street in thick brown columns when Officer Connor Maitland made the decision that was going to end his career. He had been on the perimeter for approximately 11 minutes. The fire had been called in at 6:34 a.m. The first engine had arrived at 6:38. The second engine had arrived at 6:41. Maitland had arrived at 6:43 in response to a request from dispatch to assist with traffic control. He had parked his cruiser across Brooker Street at the corner of 15th, set up his cones, and turned away the three motorists who had attempted to cut through the closed block. At 6:53, he had been watching the fire crews work the front of the building when he had noticed, near the engine stage closest to the structure, a black woman in full turnout gear walking back toward the engine, carrying what looked like a hose tool. She had her helmet on. Her SCBA mask was hanging at her chest. She was sweating. She had been on the second-floor interior attack team and had just exited the structure to swap out air bottles, which was the routine 15-minute rotation any firefighter on an interior assignment would perform. Maitland did not know any of this. Maitland had been a sworn officer for 14 months. Maitland had spent 8 of those 14 months on patrol in a neighborhood that did not include Brooker Street. He had received exactly 3 hours of training on fireground operations during his academy, and 0 hours of training on the interagency protocols that governed how police officers were supposed to behave at active fire scenes. He had a general sense, drawn from television, that firefighters did things called running into burning buildings, and he had a more specific sense, drawn from somewhere he could not have identified, that the black woman walking toward the engine did not look like the kind of person who was supposed to be wearing turnout gear at a fire scene. He had not seen any other female firefighters at the scene. He had not registered that he had not noticed the other firefighters' faces well enough to be sure of their genders. He had made an inference. The inference was that she was a civilian who had gone through the perimeter and put on equipment that did not belong to her. The inference was supported, in his own mind, by the way she was walking, which was the slow, loose walk of a person who had just spent 15 minutes inside a working structure fire and was now allowed, briefly, to breathe normally. To Maitland, the walk read is suspicious. To anyone with 24 hours of fireground experience, the walk read is normal. Captain Devin Akande had been the incident commander on Brooker Street since 6:39 a.m., when he had arrived in his command vehicle from the station 4 blocks east. He was the on-duty battalion chief for the Western District that morning, working the back half of a 48-hour rotation. He had been a firefighter for 26 years and an officer for 16. He was 48 years old. He had a son in his second year at Howard. He had a daughter, 25 years old, who was on her second year with the same department, currently assigned to Engine 14. Currently working the interior attack on the second floor of the duplex on Brooker Street. Her name was Imani Akande. She had wanted to be a firefighter since she was 9 years old, primarily because her father had refused to let her ride in the truck on Father's Day when she was 8, on the principle that the truck was not a toy and that if she wanted to ride in it, she would have to earn the seat. She had spent the next 16 years earning it. Devin had been at her academy graduation. He had also, on the principle that any chief who allowed his own daughter onto his shift created a problem for the rest of his crew, requested that she be assigned to a different battalion. She had been assigned to Engine 14, which usually worked the Eastern District. Engine 14 was running mutual aid that morning because the Western District had 2 engines tied up at a different incident. Devin had seen Imani roll up at 6:41. He had not spoken to her. He had nodded once across the staging area. She had nodded back. Both of them had then done the work in front of them. Maitland walked toward Imani at 6:54. She was 3 steps from the engine. He raised his right hand in the universal gesture of police officers who are about to assert authority over someone they have decided is in the wrong place. He said, "Ma'am, excuse me, I need to talk to you for a second." Imani did not stop walking. She had 30 seconds to swap out her air bottle and get back on the line. The interior attack team was a minute and a half from running low, and the company officer on the second floor was waiting for her to come back so he could rotate his own air. She said, without breaking stride, "Officer, I'm on the line. Talk to my captain. He's at the command vehicle." Maitland stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, I said I need to talk to you. Stop walking." She was breathing hard. Her face was streaked with the gray-black residue of a structure fire that had been running for 19 minutes inside a duplex with 30-year-old fiberglass insulation in the attic. She said, in the careful, constrained voice of a firefighter, trying not to escalate something that was about to make her late for the most time-sensitive task in her morning. Officer, I am Firefighter Akande, Engine 14. I am on an interior assignment. I am rotating my air. I need to keep moving. Please, talk to my captain. Maitland said, What's your name? Akande, Akande. Show me your ID. My turnout gear has my name on the back of my coat. My helmet number is on the front of my helmet. The truck I came on is right behind you. Officer, with respect, I need to get back on the line. There are people on the line waiting for me. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to show me identification. It was at this point that Imani made the decision that she would later, in the long, careful account she gave to the department's internal affairs investigator 2 weeks later, describe as the moment she understood what was happening. She had been a firefighter for 2 years. She had been a black woman for 25. She had developed, over the previous 25 years and the previous 2, a particular intuition about the rhythm by which an interaction with a person in authority went from manageable to dangerous. The intuition had been screaming at her since the words, "Show me your ID." She decided in the half second before she answered that she was not going to win this interaction and that she was not going to be late getting back on the line either. She said, Officer, I'm not stopping. The duplex behind me has occupants we have not confirmed are out of the structure. I'm going back to work. Talk to Captain Akande, the white command vehicle, 20 feet that way. She took one step around him. Maitland grabbed her left arm. The grab was not gentle. Maitland was 6'1" and had been a college wrestler. Imani was 5'8" and was wearing approximately 60 pounds of structural firefighting gear plus an empty SCBA harness on her back. The grip pulled her sideways. She did not fall. She did, however, drop the hose tool she had been carrying, which hit the asphalt with the small particular metallic sound that travels approximately 100 feet in the early morning quiet of a city street, where the only other sound is the diesel idle of 3 fire engines. 3 things happened in the next 4 seconds. The first was that Imani said, very loudly, Get your hands off me. I'm a firefighter. Get your hands off me. Her voice carried. It carried because firefighters are trained from the first week of academy to project from the diaphragm in environments where ambient noise is constant. And because her hearing had been impaired for the last 19 minutes by the roar of the fire, and she did not know how loud she was actually speaking, she was speaking very loudly. Every firefighter on the scene heard her. Every firefighter on the scene turned. The second was that the engineer of Engine 14, a 44-year-old senior firefighter named Pete Romano, who had been pumping the engine since arrival and who had a clear line of sight to the spot where Imani had been intercepted, keyed his radio and said, in the calm, urgent voice that fireground radio communications required, Command Engine 14 pump. We have an officer down, not an emergency injury. But the company is short a member on the second floor interior. Officer Akande has been physically detained by a police officer at the engine. I need eyes on this. Now. The third was that Captain Devin Akande, who had been 10 feet away at the command vehicle reading a thermal imaging update on his tablet, looked up. He saw the cop. He saw his daughter. He saw the cop's hand on his daughter's arm. He walked. He did not run. Running on a fireground violates several principles of incident command, including the principle that the incident commander projects calm regardless of what is occurring within the perimeter. And Devin had been an officer for 16 years. He walked in the long, unhurried stride of a man who had not raised his voice in a professional setting in approximately 8 years, the 22 feet from the command vehicle to the engine. He arrived at the spot where Maitland was still holding Imani's arm. He stopped 2 feet from Maitland. He said in the voice that had carried over more firegrounds than Maitland had operated on, Officer, take your hand off her. Right now. Maitland turned. He saw Devin. He saw the 4 stripes on Devin's helmet. He saw the badge on the front of Devin's coat, which read Battalion Chief. He did not, in the half second between turning and processing, immediately let go. Devin said, I am the incident commander on this fireground. The woman whose arm you are holding is a member of my interior attack team. She has been off the line for 90 seconds. The team she belongs to is currently on the second floor of a working structure fire and is approaching the air management threshold that requires her to be back inside that structure within the next 3 minutes. You are interfering with fireground operations during an active life safety incident. I am ordering you, as the incident commander, to release her, to step back from the engine, and to return to the perimeter. If you do not comply with this order, in the next 5 seconds, I am going to instruct my engineer to log this exchange on the run report, and I am going to contact your watch commander personally. 3 seconds. Maitland let go. Amani picked up the hose tool. She walked, without looking at Maitland, to the engine. She climbed up onto the running board. She swapped her empty bottle for a fresh one with the practiced efficiency of a firefighter who had done the rotation 300 times. She climbed down. She put her mask back on. She walked back toward the structure. She did not look at her father. Her father did not look at her either. They had done this before. They both knew that work was work and that the conversation, when it came afterward. Devin turned back to Maitland. He said, "Stand by, officer. I am about to make 2 phone calls. The first will be to your watch commander. The second will be to my own battalion chief. You will remain on this corner until you are relieved. You will not move from this position. Do you understand me?" Maitland, who had gone the color of paper, nodded. Devin walked back to the command vehicle. The fire was knocked down at 7:08. Salvage and overhaul continued until 8:14. No civilian occupants were injured. The duplex was a total loss on the second floor and a partial loss on the first. Amani Akande worked the rest of the call. She did not say anything to her father during the operation. She debriefed with her company officer at the station 2 hours later. Her left arm had bruising consistent with a sustained grip injury, which she had photographed in the locker room at the station before she had showered. She had also written, on a yellow legal pad in the small administrative office on the second floor of the station, a 4-page narrative of the encounter, with timestamps, while the details were fresh in her mind. She had signed and dated the narrative. She had given it to her company officer, who had given it to the battalion chief who relieved her father at 8 a.m., who had given it to the department's deputy chief of operations by 9:30 a.m. Captain Akande had made the 2 phone calls he had described to Maitland by 7:18 a.m. The first was to Lieutenant Albert Crane, the watch commander on duty at the police district responsible for the area that included Brooker Street. Crane was a 23-year veteran of the police department who had worked with Devin Akande on 3 previous incidents and who recognized Devin's voice on the phone. Devin's account of what had occurred at Brooker Street, delivered in the same controlled radio cadence Devin had been using to direct his crews for the past 44 minutes, was approximately 90 seconds long. Crane listened. Crane said, in the careful voice of a watch commander who had recognized within the first sentence that he was being handed a situation that was going to require the mourning of every supervisor in his chain of command. "Chief, I am dispatching a sergeant to your scene. The officer will be relieved of duty pending investigation. I will have my deputy commander contact your chief's office before the hour is out." "I am extremely sorry." Devin thanked him. He hung up. He made the second call to the department's chief of operations, who briefed the fire chief, who placed a call to the chief of police, which connected at 7:41 a.m. Officer Connor Maitland was relieved of duty at 7:34 a.m., which was approximately 41 minutes after he had grabbed Amani Akande's arm. He was driven from the scene by his sergeant. He was instructed to surrender his service weapon and his badge at the precinct, which he did at 7:58 a.m. He was placed on administrative leave pending internal affairs investigation. The investigation, which was initiated formally at 9:15 a.m. the same morning, was conducted on an expedited timeline at the request of the fire chief's office, the police chief's office, and the office of the city manager, all of whom had been on a conference call together at 8:30 a.m. The investigation took 6 weeks. It produced a 41-page report. The report concluded that Officer Maitland's conduct had violated 3 departmental policies: the policy on professional courtesy with allied agencies, the policy on use of force during non-criminal contacts, and the policy on the documentation of probable cause prior to physical detention. The report did not formally conclude that race had been a factor in Maitland's decision to approach Amani, because the report did not have the procedural tools to make that conclusion. The report did note, in a paragraph the police chief later quoted in his public statement, that Maitland had failed to identify any reasonable basis for his belief that the firefighter he had detained was not in fact a firefighter, and that the failure was not reconcilable with adequate professional judgment. Maitland was offered the choice between resignation and termination. He resigned. The resignation was effective on the day the report was delivered, 8 weeks after the morning of the fire, Imani filed a civil suit against the city the following spring, with counsel provided by the Firefighters Union. The suit settled out of court for an amount that was not made public, but that her union representative described in a private conversation with the local newspaper's labor reporter as more than fair. The terms of the settlement included a written apology from the police department, a commitment by the city to update the joint training curriculum between the fire and police departments to include a 4-hour module on fireground operations and the role of police officers at active scenes, and the funding of a new 2-position firefighter recruit class focused on increasing demographic representation in the department. The recruit class was not named after Imani. She had requested that it not be. She had told the city manager, in the brief meeting that finalized the settlement, that she did not want her name on anything related to the incident because she had not become a firefighter to have her name on a recruit class. The joint training module was developed over the following 9 months by a working group that included 2 captains from the fire department, 2 lieutenants from the police department, and a curriculum designer from the regional community college that ran the Joint Emergency Services Academy. The module covered the fundamentals of incident command authority at fire scenes, the standard appearance and equipment of firefighters and turnout gear, the protocols by which police officers were to communicate with fireground personnel during active operations, and the specific circumstances under which police authority overlapped with or yielded to fire authority on a scene. The module became mandatory for every new recruit class at both academies and for in-service training for sworn officers in both departments during the year of its rollout. The fire chief's office tracked, in the 2 years after the module was implemented, a measurable reduction in interagency conflict reports at fire scenes within the city, including a complete absence of incidents involving the physical detention of firefighters by police. The data was not publicized. The fire chief had been clear with his staff that he did not want the data to become a public relations talking point. He wanted it to be data. He wanted the work to continue without spectacle. Captain Devin Akande was promoted to Deputy Chief of Operations the following year, a promotion that had been in the consideration set before the incident and that the department chief subsequently confirmed had not been accelerated or modified by the events on Brooker Street. He took the promotion. He continued to work a modified rotation that kept him out of his daughter's direct chain of command. They had dinner together every other Sunday at his house, the way they had been doing for the previous 6 years, which neither of them planned to change. The conversation about Brooker Street, when it eventually happened approximately 3 weeks after the morning of the fire, at the kitchen table, after a Sunday dinner Imani's mother had made. Devin had asked his daughter how her arm was. She had said it was fine. He had asked her whether she had wanted him to handle the cop himself on the scene in front of the crew, the way he had handled him. She had thought about the question for a moment. Then she had said, in the careful voice she had inherited from him, that she had wanted him to handle it exactly the way he had handled it, because she had wanted the cop to learn what an incident commander sounded like, and because she had wanted the rest of the crew to learn what a chief did when one of his firefighters was being interfered with on the line, regardless of whose daughter she happened to be. Devin had nodded. He had not said anything else. They had finished their coffee. Officer Connor Maitland did not become a police officer again. He moved out of the city the year after his resignation. He took a job in private security at a regional shopping center in a town 200 miles away. He gave one interview 4 years after the incident to a podcast hosted by a former police union official, in which he described what had happened on Brooker Street. In the interview, he was asked whether he believed his conduct had been racially motivated. He had thought about the question for a long moment. Then he had said, "I think I was wrong. I think I would have made the same call if she had been white. I also don't actually know if that's true. I have been thinking about it for 4 years and I still don't know. I don't think that uncertainty makes me a good person. I think it means I don't get to be sure about myself in the way I used to be sure about myself." He had not said anything more. The interviewer had moved to a different topic. The episode was heard by a few thousand people. Imani Akande worked 12 more years at the fire department. She was promoted to lieutenant in her 7th year and to captain in her 10th. She was assigned to a different engine and a different battalion than her father throughout her career, on the principle her father had requested at her academy graduation. She did not return to Brooker Street in her capacity as a firefighter, although the duplex was rebuilt 3 years after the fire and was occupied by the year she made captain by a different family. She drove past it occasionally, on the way to other calls without comment. She had told her partner when he asked her once whether she still thought about the morning of the cop, that she thought about it the way she thought about every fire she had worked, which was almost not at all most days, and very sharply on the specific anniversaries that happened to coincide with a structure fire on her shift. The work, she had told him, was the thing. The incident on Brooker Street had been a minute of the work. The rest of the work had been the work,